Everybody seems to think you put your garden in now. By now, I mean 3/4 of the way through May. Right? That's when everybody thinks you should even start thinking about gardening. There's some things that could have gone in before now. There's some things that can go in now. And there's some things that gotta wait a little bit. The dandelion root is plugged into the ground, and it only does what it does when the ground is warm enough for the plant to respond to that. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and it's Victoria Day weekend. And this is the weekend most people where I live anyway, Nova Scotia, Canada, plant out their transplants. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, cucumber, things like that. Heat-loving vegetables that aren't frost tolerant. And it's a rule of thumb, but where I live anyway, this particular part of the province, it's an unreliable time of year to plant those things. And some other people use a rule of thumb called they don't plant their heat-loving, non-cold tolerant vegetables until the first new moon in June, which is a good rule of thumb because it's well into June. Pretty unlikely there's going to be a frost night after that. Not impossible, but unlikely. So those are rules of thumb people use. I don't use either of those. I tend to look around and see what's happening in terms of like perennials and weeds and things like that. Things that are stuck in the ground all year long. They respond to the changes in the seasonal change in temperature of the soil. And in particular, I use the dandelion as an indicator of what to do. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I've talked about it before. I just sort of bring people up to date on that. I've written a new article on my dandelion planting schedule. When to plant everything based on the stage of growth of the dandelion. It's a free article on Substack, maritimegardening.substack.com. I'll put a link to it in the show notes of this video. Anyway, the gist of it is that every plant, when it's a seed, has a particular temperature that the seed will germinate at. It's called the minimum germination temperature. Some seeds, if you plant them too early, they just wait. They just wait for the temperature to get right. But other seeds, like a pumpkin seed or a squash seed or a bean seed, if you plant that too early, it will, not only will it not germinate, it'll just rot and die. Okay, so planting things at the right time is important. Also, planting out transplants at the right time is important, right? So let me talk about that a little bit. The reason I use the dandelion, the stage of growth of the dandelion, is because a dandelion root is a perennial plant. It's plugged into the ground, and it only does what it does when the ground is warm enough for the plant to respond to that, okay? So when the ground gets warm enough, all of a sudden the roots start sending up greens. And then when the ground's warmer still, it will send up its flowers. And when it's warm enough, they will open and be yellow. And then after it's been long enough and warm enough, those yellow flowers turn white and they get all fluffy, and you can blow on them and play with them and that sort of thing. So I call those different stages dandelion green, dandelion yellow, and dandelion white. So for me, the things that you plant when you see the dandelion greens, which is around April, early May, where I live, is lettuce, onions or leeks, or onion sets, parsnip seeds, spinach seeds, okay? And there's other things too, but those are just basic things people tend to plant, right? And if anything you're trying to grow isn't on my list, just look up that vegetable, see what family it's in, and see if it's in the same family as a vegetable on my list. Like there's all kinds of vegetables that are related to cabbage, for instance. So I've got cabbage on the list, but you could substitute that for meaning kale or collard greens, etc. There's broccoli, there's lots of things that are related to cabbage, okay? So anyway, when I see the dandelion greens early in the season when it's cold and there's still frosts, frequent frosts, lettuce, onion, parsnip, leek, spinach, right, that sort of thing. Then once I see the dandelions yellow, right, that's when I plant things like beets, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, Swiss chard, kale, parsley, peas, potatoes, radishes, and turnips. Peas, actually, you can plant them earlier than that. Their minimum germination temperature, I think, is like 7 degrees Celsius, so they're a bit cooler. So you can plant your peas in And they're pretty frost tolerant, especially if they're inoculated. They've been treated with this pink stuff, less likely to rot if they get a bit too cold. So you can plant your peas early when you see the dandelion greens start emerging, but they might take a while to germinate. I plant my peas early. I tend to put a little microclimate over them to sort of just make it a little bit warmer to improve that germination. And then when I see the dandelions turn white, that's when I assume that we're past all risk of frost because it's well into the year. For me, that's late May, early June, usually. That's when you plant your beans and your corn and your cucumbers and your eggplant. I get eggplant transplants. That's when I move them out. I don't have enough time here to plant eggplant seeds and have them germinate, right? Melons, peppers, squash, tomatoes, all that sort of stuff. I move my tomato transplants out. I move my pepper transplants out. I got basil indoors right now. I move the basil out. Now, modifiers. If you're concerned about something being planted too early, when you see dandelion yellow, right, the yellow dandelion flowers, maybe don't plant things as soon as you see a yellow dandelion, because there's certain parts of my lawn where the dandelions appear first, and then eventually they're sort of everywhere, right? Right? So if you just see one dandelion turn yellow, it's probably a bit early, unless you've got things that are sort of cold tolerant, like things like kale. Those seeds can handle being sort of frozen and thawed a bit. So you can plant your kale as soon as you see a dandelion turn yellow. They might not germinate right away, but the cold nights are not going to kill those seeds. Other seeds, I find carrot seed are a bit more temperamental, so I wait till I see lots of dandelions before I plant my carrots. Right? Same thing when you're planting out your transplants. You're moving out your transplants, peppers, tomatoes, and things like that. You see all the dandelions turn white. Maybe you just see a couple turn white. Maybe wait a few days or wait a week, right? Wait till you see a lot of dandelions turn white. Then you know it's probably warm enough. I mean, the challenge with transplants is that it might be warm outside. Let's say it's 20 degrees Celsius, that's room temperature, like 67 Fahrenheit sort of thing, 68. So it's warm enough, and maybe you look at the forecast and it's going to be warm all week, so say, okay, now we're past, it's going to be 20 degrees during the day and 10 degrees during the night. It's warm enough to plant out tomatoes. But what you're not accounting for is the temperature of the soil. Has the soil warmed up enough to accept, has the soil warmed up enough so that the roots of those plants will be okay? Tomato plants, peppers, these are like tropical or subtropical plants. They're not equipped to handle cold soil. And so you might have a warm day and a string of warm days, and you plant them and they just look like they're dying. And what's happening is that the roots are dying. It's just too cold for the roots. So if you're not sure about that, I mean, if you've had lots of warm days and all the dandelions have turned white and you've waited and your transplants are indoors and they're 2 feet high and so they're still in little tiny pots and you got to move them out, right? Plant them out, but don't plant them too deep. The deeper you go into the soil in spring, the colder it gets. So plant the roots shallow in the soil where it's warm. A lot of people will lay tomatoes over, plant them sort of sideways, and then bend the stems up to keep the roots out of the colder, lower soil. Another good trick is when you start seeing the dandelions turning white, like let's say you come home from work and all of a sudden you see a couple white dandelions. If you've got a bed where you're going to plant your tomatoes, put some sort, I've got all kinds of them here, plastic domes and stuff like that. Affect some sort of microclimate, even if you just put a transparent tarp or something like that. Put something over the bed where those things are going to go and let the soil warm up, right? So you put a plastic dome or a row tunnel or just plastic. You can use black plastic. I think clear is better because the sun actually gets through and actually heats the soil itself. That's why greenhouses use clear plastic, not black plastic for growing, right? So I think you're better off with that. Black attracts, people are always going to say, well, black plastic attracts heat and the plastic gets warm. But if you've got a transparent plastic dome over your garden, the sun gets through the transparent plastic, heats up the ground, and you create a microclimate, right? So I actually think you make a more effective microclimate that way. But you do whatever. But the point is, if you're going to plant, if you're worried about the soil being too cool, and I often am, affect some sort of microclimate over the bed where you're going to be planting those things, and leave it for a few days like that to get this, to warm the soil up, move things ahead. 3 days under a microclimate is like 2 weeks of warm weather in terms of like heating the ground up. Okay, so that's the gist of it, right? If you're, people are always saying, I work in an office and people are like, oh, you're getting your garden planted. They can't believe that I'm planting things in April. They can't believe I'm planting things in May. They can't believe, they don't seem to, like everybody seems to think you put your garden in now. But there's so many things you can do before now. And there's some things you have to do, by now I mean 3/4 of the way through May. Right? That's when everybody thinks you should even start thinking about gardening. I start out here as soon as things thaw, and I get going with a lot of projects. Now, admittedly, I have a large garden, but I've always kind of done it that way. There's some things that could have gone in before now. There's some things that can go in now, and there's some things, at least the way things are right now. It's cold. It's cold enough that my hands have gone numb while I'm recording this video. It's probably 10 Celsius. There's some things that got to wait a little bit. I've got transplants in the house. I want to get them in the ground, but it's too early. I could take a risk by putting a plastic dome over them and making a microclimate and doing all that sort of stuff. But then every morning you got to come out and vent it and do all this stuff. It really depends on how busy you are. At this stage of things, I just want to put stuff in the ground and forget about them, get everything mulched and have things easy. So I'm just going to wait a few more weeks, right? I'm going to wait. It's probably going to be, like, none of my dandelions have turned white yet. So it's just too early to plant all those heat-loving things, not planting any beans in the ground, that sort of thing. But I do have lots of stuff planted. Right now I've got, and I've been doing this over the last 2 weeks, because that's 2 weeks ago I started seeing yellow dandelions. So I planted potatoes. I still got some potatoes to plant, but I've got almost all my potatoes planted. I've moved early in the season. Perennials that I wanted to move, like berry bushes. I did that in April. I planted carrots, planted beets, planted Swiss chard. I've got parsnips in the ground. I got peas in the ground. All my onions, onion sets, even onions. I planted onion seeds for green onions and also onion sets for green onions, but also just regular kind of storage onions. I got those all planted. So I think that's pretty much everything. Oh, kale. Of course, spinach and lettuce, right? So all those things are already done, right? So I've only got a few things left to plant, really. And this is the time, and this is the weekend most people start thinking about gardening. And I got an enormous garden, 2,500 square feet, and I've got about 3/4 of it already planted. And most of the beds already worked and ready to go, and, mulched and weeded and everything's, so don't wait until this, 3/4 of the way through May to start gardening. But number 2, be aware that there's things you can plant early spring, there's things you can plant mid-spring, and there's things you shouldn't plant until late spring. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out that article. It's my Substack page, maritimegardening.substack.com. Maybe subscribe, maybe become a paying subscriber. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. Check out my sponsor, Vessi Seeds, and use my coupon code GAVS25 to save money on shipping. And if you're into the outdoors, fishing and stuff like that, check out my outdoors channel, separate channel, Outdoors on the Cheap. If you're sick and tired of watching people to basically convince you to spend ridiculous amounts of money to enjoy your outdoors activities, check out my channel, Outdoors on the Cheap, and see how you do it with just the basics. That's all you need, right? Hook it, a line, and a worm, right? But anyway, until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.